the dizzy heights of my biblical scholarship career, if you can call it that. Today is the second anniversary of the day I uploaded my very first video on this journey, as it were. And I decided again that I'm going to do another anniversary, because actually last year's was really useful for taking stock in what I'd learned over the year before that. And I reckon I've learned more in this second year than I did in the first. And it's really easy to lose sight of all the stuff you've actually covered in a 12-month period. And when I was looking back over the videos I'd done, I think more than half the tangents have been in the last 12 months as well. So yeah, I think this is very definitely worth doing. Although I'm not going to bother doing the stats again, because admittedly they're worse for the second year than they were for the first year, but there you go, never mind. The more I've dug into this stuff, the more it's become clear that this is a really important question to answer. And it occurred to me that why did I not do this sooner? But the answer seems to be actually just simply because it didn't occur to me. I flagged myself as agnostic at best, and then just got on with what was in front of me in day-to-day life, as we tend to do. But yeah, the further I've got into this, the more we start to realise that there are some pretty big holes in the secular view of the world and all the rest of it. Now, perhaps still that doesn't matter. That's very much still on the table here. But it's very difficult to argue, I think, with the idea that, well, Jordan Peterson put it very well in We Who Wrestle with God, that if we all lived in accordance with Christianity, proper Christianity, not terrible Christianity, then that would align best with how the world actually works in real life. For instance, do we have better lives if we seek out acquiring more stuff and have a bit of an inward focus on gratification, that sort of thing? Or if, as Jordan Peterson puts it, we actually make life about taking on as much responsibility as we can bear and then living that way. I think responsibility in that context is very, very broad. So it's more than just putting the bins out, although putting the bins out is still very important. I think if we really drilled into that question, then we'd find that there's no reasonable argument that we're better to live lives the way we generally do, myself included, versus living properly as a Christian should. I realise that's a massive statement, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say on it here. I may do a tangent on it at some point, actually. But I think that's fair to say that if you really get down and dirty with it, you'd really struggle to argue that it's better just to self-gratification versus responsibility. The inevitable but there, of course, is that obviously that doesn't prove that Christianity is true. It could just be a string of people over thousands of years who managed to cobble together a coherent narrative that expressed a way of living life that actually happens to line up very well with fundamental human principles. That's an amazing feat in itself, but it's possible. And another way of thinking about it that occurred is if you think of children when they're asking the why question. So they ask you why something is the way it is, and you say the answer, and they say why, and they say because of this, and why, because of that. And eventually you just get down to a point where you just say, look, just because, okay, let's just move on. You can do that with just about anything. And even if you stay away from the mega extremes like the Holocaust or something, and get something mundane, like, for example, I would quite like a Mercedes S-Class Coupe. Ah, you're back! This is very ambitious after last year's attempt, but I suppose at least I'm not dead this time. I would like a Mercedes S-Class Coupe. Why do you want one? Because they're very elegant, they're beautiful interiors, they've got whacking great engines so you can waft around, they're rare and interesting, and they're also practical. Why does that make it a good thing to have one? Because it will make me happy, and I've worked very hard to earn the money, not from YouTube, so I've earned it. Probably won't make you happy for very long, and then you'll want the next shiny thing, but why would it make you happy? Because it's something I want, and then I'll have it. I will be happier. Why do you want to be happy? Because it's nice to be happy. And what does that do for you? It makes my life better. It's the point of life is to be happy. Is it? So what happens when life goes wrong? Or if you live somewhere else in the world where people have pretty miserable time, or you got Viktor Frankled into a concentration camp, what would be the point of your life then if your purpose is hedonistic pleasure? Look, just flip off, will you? So I think the question why is just far more interesting. At work in finance, a lot of people come to me saying, I want to do this thing, what do you think? And quite often it's just a horrible idea, so like, no, let's not do that. But if it doesn't fail the horrible idea test, you're left with, okay, why do you want to do it? And you drill it down, and if it matches up with their actual objectives, then great, do it. If not, then don't. But you get to a very superficial level of objective. So in that context, that's as far as you can go. But in life, you can go below that. How do you get those objectives? Where do they come from? And you end up getting to a point where the secular world just has no answer. I mean, going back to Hitler, what Hitler did is wrong as far as I'm concerned. But why? And you can go around in circles forever debating why that is. But ultimately, you just get stuck at a point where you just say, well, because we all agree it's wrong. And that's deeply unsatisfying because we all feel it's objectively wrong, not just wrong because we say so. Don't get me wrong, maybe it's not, and maybe none of it matters, or the don't be a dick idea is enough. But what if it isn't? What if there is actually more stuff we're supposed to be doing better than we are? I think it's worth briefly addressing there the question of, okay, so if that accepts that there is some sort of theistic underpinning for life, it doesn't necessarily mean Christianity is right, because we've got Islam, Hinduism and Judaism. So what's to say one of those? And that's a question a few people have said to me as one of their key objections. Okay, maybe there's a God, but who says it's that one and not that one? And our friend Clive had a good take on this that I'd encountered this year, or an interesting take at least. And he was talking about there is a lot of overlap between Hinduism, Islam, Judaism and Christianity, but the other three are somewhat incomplete, which is a terrible thing to say these days, and I don't think you're supposed to say that. But, there we go. Relative to Christianity, I don't know a huge amount about those other religions, or Christianity for that matter. But I think there's a reasonable argument to be made there, in terms of they are less full, or potentially less sophisticated, perhaps. And there's also the factor that, I'm going to do a tangent on this soon, because I've nearly finished the book, 1,100 pages long. That as far as I'm aware, Christianity is the only religion that has any sort of historical underpin to support it. So to try and wrap that section up before I offend everyone, that's where I've got to in my own understanding anyway, and is why I believe now more than I did at the start that this question is at least worth trying to answer. In a lot of what I've read is very supportive of Christianity. All the objections are thrown at it. It handles them very simply. It doesn't seem to have any trouble. But an example of where I get stuck there personally is that however many years ago, everyone used to believe that the Earth was the centre of the universe and everything used to revolve around us. And then Copernicus comes along, not Doc Brown's dog, the other one, and says, no, this is not actually right. And suddenly everything changed. And suddenly the Earth is the centre of the universe, to the Earth is just a fairly, insignificant, arguably, tiny speck amongst the rest of the galaxies. And it's that idea that one tiny extra piece of information that drops into the equation suddenly changes everything. And I guess I'm sort of waiting for that. It was something I explored in the Shroud of Turin tangent. But suddenly, the Shroud of Turin, the resurrection, the Big Bang and consciousness, all of that combined at least has a case for being reasonable to put forward as evidence for there being some sort of God. But at the same time, it's also pretty much, it's flirting with the idea of God of the gaps. Some people will argue that it's absolutely God of the gaps. I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that. But it could be a thing where one piece of information drops in, suddenly all that falls like, oh, that's what that was. On the flip side of that, of course, we become what we consume. And I've been neck deep in this for 2 years now. So it seems inevitable that I would gradually creep towards Christianity, to some extent at least, simply just by virtue of being immersed in it. And that's such a difficult thing to actually balance. But I find myself in a position where, based on what I've read so far, I should probably believe in God, but I don't. Although, interesting point on that one, actually, a friend of mine recently raised the question and said, would we even necessarily know if we believe in God? He suggests perhaps we do, and we don't even actually know it. And that's a bit of a noodle baker, that one. Another interesting idea I've come across this year is from a YouTube chap called Glenn Scrivener, who he talks about belief in God requires a sort of childlike trust. I really struggle with that, because obviously the same is true of Santa Claus, but it doesn't make it true. It's an interesting idea whether that's why a lot of academics potentially don't. I don't know the stats, but I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson arguing recently that a lot of academic people don't believe in God, and even offering that up as sort of evidence for the non-existence of God, because if it were true, then smart people would have figured it out. Arrogance aside on that one, it does seem that a bunch of objective people are going to lack probably some of that childlike trust. And I guess that's where I fall down as well, in terms of I have a very objective brain, even if I would actually make a terrible scientist. I've also dabbled this year with a little bit of church. This actually came about because my tween-age daughter decided she wanted to go, and I thought that's a great idea because she's immersed in this world. It's very superficial, it's all about showing off and rights, but rights lacking in the other side of that coin being responsibility and blame and identity linked with sexual preference and flexible gender. None of it seemingly with any more foundation than just because. Some of that, of course, is just the cycle. A lot of it will be similar to when I was that age as well. But on the basis that dumb stuff normalises, there are some additional weird ideas out there at the minute that just seem to lack any sort of underpin, at least as far as I understand them. So I just like the idea that for at least an hour a week, she's thinking about the possibility that there is more to life, and life isn't just based on how people feel about stuff. It does, however, mean I have to be in church for the first 20 minutes before they go out to Sunday school. Well, there's a lot of good to say about it. It's a really nice church. There's a lot of wonderful people there. It's a lovely little community. But yeah, I think regardless of where this journey takes me, the whole singing thing and all that, not really my cup of tea. I don't know if you can hear the rain on the microphone. It's about the 19th time we've had a downpour today, and it was fantastic sunshine 10 minutes ago. But yes. Beep. Otherwise, though, I think there's 3 big milestones that I've got past in this year. The first one was that I had this idea that the average Christian, I don't think, seems to get it. Not saying I get it either, but I don't claim to believe it. So it seemed a bit odd when people saying, oh, I believe this stuff, and then talking about stuff like that doesn't really make much sense, and to me doesn't seem to agree with the Bible either. But Simon the Vicar, who I had lunch with, had a great answer for that. She's talking about Christianity is deep enough that I can spend 2 years reading half the Bible and generating hours of endless questions. And at the same time, it's safe enough that people can just sort of paddle in the shallows and be safe and content. And I'm not quite sure on that idea, but I kind of like it. I think it seems reasonable. Another big milestone is I've drastically moved in terms of my understanding of what sin is. The problem with this one is I've come to this myself, so I could be completely wrong, but it's more about this idea that sin is like, it's not naughty deeds, it's more like misplaced aim in life. So I would claim to be a fairly moral and well-behaved chap. Don't think I'm too bad, but my aim in life is very much skewed towards the materialistic. I would argue in sort of to a somewhat noble degree, in the sense of a lot of that is to protect my family, that sort of thing. But it's not just that. And I'm starting to realise, I think, in biblical terms at least, this is perhaps sin, in the sense of I'm aiming at the wrong thing, if Christianity is true. The last milestone is quite a big negative, actually, but it's this idea of responsibility being undermined by the Bible. And in my professional life, I've very much always valued responsibility and, do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And that's basically a foundation on which my whole career is being built. But aside from the fact that potentially that's a little bit materialistic and potentially therefore sinful, maybe, I really don't like that the Bible just seems to, it undermines responsibility in the sense that if you achieve something good, it's because God did it. If you do something bad, you get punished for it. So it sort of sticks out like a sore thumb, where the rest of the Bible does seem to align very well with what would be arguably demonstrably good life principles. This seems to grate on that, and yeah, I don't know what to do with it. Hopefully over the next 12 months my understanding will evolve, so it would be kind of interesting to see in the year 3 anniversary video what exactly I've managed to achieve on that one. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it this year. I enjoyed it the first year, but I'm enjoying it more this year than last, despite the stats. I'm getting some really interesting questions. There are some people I know who don't watch this because the argument being that the Old Testament is boring. And I can absolutely see where they're coming from on that. But when you read the whole thing and pull out the ideas over the big picture as it evolves, it's some fantastically interesting stuff. So I don't know if perhaps that gets missed or something, but fair to say, if the videos are boring, it's my failing, not the Old Testament's. Still a bit more Old Testament to go, but I think we should be onto the New Testament before the next anniversary, so we'll see if that gets more interesting. But yeah, so far it's been interesting anyway. Lastly, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been part of this along the way. It's been great fun sharing it with people. Not many people, but you know, it doesn't really matter. I proudly hold on to my crown as the least successful person on the internet, but say it's been fun doing it nonetheless. I haven't done a cake again this year because it's, again, a little excessive, but I do have an apple pie.